What is up, Bible in a Year family? Episode 146. We're looking at Esther 6 through 10 today. Reverend Steve Miller with us again, and this is the culmination of this amazing story of Esther. Please join us. All right, there you go. Episode 146. What is up, my brother?
Oh, not too much. Just excited about talking about Esther.
You're excited about something else, too. Your child is graduating from high school.
Yes, my oldest is graduating from high school. It's a big step. Big step.
Your daughter is actually featured on the wall of Kingdom.
Yeah, right.
You remember this? Do you remember how old she was in that picture?
Quite young, because that would have been at one of their camps or...
I don't even know if she's in middle school in that picture. I think it was like one of the kids' camps.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it was one of the kids' ones. Yeah, I forgot about that.
That is funny. That is funny. Oh my gosh, you're among the ranks of parents who've watched their children graduate.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this. I'm a grandfather.
That's a big one.
You're sitting there going, one step at a time, Kev.
Yeah. I'm not ready for that.
Well, you have a few years ahead of you before that's going to happen. Well, listen, buddy, let's start talking Esther 6 through 10. We had a good conversation about this off camera prior to this episode. Talk to us for a second. Like, if you're looking at this book, I said to you off camera, what direction do you want to go with all this? And you said...
Well, I said it's one of those interesting books where you think it should end, and it doesn't. The story, as the story continues, you expect at one point for the king to just step in and take care of things, and he says no. And here are Mordecai and Esther put into this position where they have to take care of the situation themselves. We talked in the last episode about the wisdom of the serpent. Like how they have to be so wise, and we see that like it just continues. And now it's Esther and Mordecai together working to save the Jewish people. But of course, that means we're skipping ahead in the story a little bit. It's just it's fascinating what we do with the characters in the second half as we begin to see them play out for the pages.
It's funny at the end of chapter 5. It's almost like you hear that music from a movie or a suspenseful television show. Dun, dun, dun. You know what I mean? And it just, and then you switch to chapter 6, and here we have Xerxes. He can't sleep at night. And, in order to bore himself so that he can go back to sleep, he reads the historical record and he uncovers that, oh my gosh, Mordecai saved my life. What are we going to do for Mordecai? All the while, Haman has set up this impaling pole so Mordecai can die on it. It's like, okay, we're going to kill the Jews on this date, and the first Jew to die is going to be Mordecai. We're going to impale him on that pole and kick it off with Mordecai's death. He will be the first of all the Jews to die. And then, I'm kind of telling the story that these people are reading as they're watching this, but Haman pulled into Xerxes' court, and Xerxes says, who should we honor above every other person? And Haman, obviously, in his arrogance, will say, oh, well, that's me. I'm the one to be honored. I'll tell you who we should honor, Mordecai. And you mentioned this off camera. Haman really goes from being this horrendous villain to the fool worthy of death.
As he parades Mordecai around in the city, very unhappy now. And that's, again, it's the beauty of this story. Like it's told so well as we shift from scene to scene. And like, why are we in the king's bedchamber now where he can't sleep? And now why are we following Haman into his home? Why do we need to know about these gallows? Oh, well, they're going to come up later. All this stuff is pointing towards something. We don't know who wrote the book of Esther, but they should have written a lot more. Like, we need more stories that are built like this. Haman turns out to be quite quite the buffoon in a sense. Maybe buffoon's wrong, but he certainly looks the fool as it seems like he's working everything out where he's going to have power and kill all of his enemies. And suddenly he's parading Mordecai around and telling everybody how wonderful he is and how much the king wants to honor him. And suddenly this isn't going the way he wanted it to go. But we've got some problems on our hands.
Well, you look at this story, and we mentioned the word fairy tale in the last episode, and clearly we don't believe this is a fairy tale. You and I both believe that this is history. It's an account. It's a historical account. But this is a guy who does very much play out like a villain in a Disney fairy tale. I mean, he's the Wicked Witch of the West. He is the evil stepmother. He is he's Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. I mean, pick anyone. He's the little girl with the bag in Finding Nemo. I mean, he's all of these things, and he ends up meeting his demise. And to the victor goes the spoils. Now we mentioned this off camera, and I thought it was a great point. So folks know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace with King Nebuchadnezzar. They know the story of Daniel in the lion's den with King Darius. They're coming to know the story of Esther and Mordecai and King Xerxes. You mentioned how the story goes on. Contrast for me and for all of us, if you will, the difference between Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, and Darius with what we're seeing here with Mordecai, Esther, and King Xerxes.
Yeah. Well, the end of both of the stories, which are incredible stories in their own right, but the end of those stories both end with the king taking care of things. Nebuchadnezzar takes care of the situation. Well, you don't have to bow after it. It's fine. And as a matter of fact, everyone needs to honor their God. And in both of those stories, it plays out that the king kind of takes care of things. The end of the book, where you think the book of Esther should end, if the book of Esther ended the way that those two stories did, we wouldn't have the final two chapters. King Xerxes would have just taken care of things, and we'll just make this edict. But the king finds a way to get out of making that decision, probably because he doesn't want to look like a fool. Like, he just made an edict, now he's going to backtrack. He can't do that. Too much pride here. There's a lot of pride in some of these other characters in Esther. And so instead of doing that, what's he going to do? Well, you figure out a way. And so the last two chapters are the people who would have been the victims having to figure out a way to not be victims. But they have to use authority somewhat, but they can't use all of the king's authority, because otherwise the king could have just wiped out his previous edict that all the Jews were going to be killed. And so what are they going to do? They have to actually figure that out. And it's shrewd what they do, what they figure out. Not only a way to protect themselves, but to defend themselves in such a way that the people around them, the ones who would kill them, are not going to kill them any longer, and are in fact, some of them are put to death themselves. And it's just a way of, I think, enhancing the kind of the heroics of Esther and Mordecai, which is an incredible way to end the story. It's a way that we have taken this story and enhanced the heroes of the story, and I think made them more laudable in a lot of ways. Like what? And again, if we try to put ourselves into their shoes, if we ask ourselves the question, so where is God moving? And in our own lives, where is God moving, and how has God moved, and how has God put me here? So what can I do that, using the wisdom that God has given me, in order to navigate this world that I'm in and accomplish his goal? Not just pray and hope somebody else can take care of it. Which, nothing against Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They weren't just praying and standing back and letting God handle everything. They were certainly active, but we see this play out in a very different way in the book of Esther.
Yeah, it's interesting. Years ago, and I'm sure you've done this or taught this or run across this at the minimum, is that old Bible study, Experiencing God. Do you remember that, Henry Blackaby? And one of the dominant scriptures in all of that is, some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And that's part of this that I absolutely love. Xerxes, whether to save face or whatever, says, look, the king's edict, that in our law, you can't go back on it. Once it's there, it's there. So you're going to, I'm going to empower you to defend yourselves. Before, this wasn't going to be a fair fight, but I'm going to empower you to defend yourself. And how many times do we read this throughout the Old Testament, where God rises up and fights for Israel? And, I understand when you get over into the first century church, we have this list of martyrs, but there's also countless places where you can see God intervening, breaking Peter out of jail, so on and so forth down the line. Even all of Paul's survival until he gets to Rome and ultimately is martyred. This is God going ahead and saying, I'm going to fight and fight and fight to preserve. I mean, think about this. Let's make this messianic in nature. If Haman's plan is played out, all right, and the Jews are then destroyed, there's no book of Nehemiah. They don't come back. They don't rebuild the wall. The temple does not see its completion. There's no restoration of Israel. There's no need for Antiochus Epiphanes to come in and set himself up in the temple and for there to be a Maccabean revolution. What does Rome care about Jerusalem? It's just a desert. It's a field. But because of what Mordecai and Esther do, it restores a sense of national pride and strengthens them as the people. Then when Artaxerxes looks at Nehemiah how many ever years ago and says, what's going on with you, man? And he says, look, we got to get home and we got to make this thing right. And because they do that, they're preserved as a people, and Christ ultimately comes. And Caesar's in power, but Paul says, look here, I'm not making this a regional thing, and I'm certainly not doing it for self-preservation. I'm going to Rome, and the gospel's going to be advanced. And I know that's hard to see that in this, but, like when you look at a passage, and I know people are like, whoa, what are you talking about? I thought we were in the book of Esther. But when you look at a passage like Acts 17, where Paul looks at the gathering at the Areopagus and says, look, you talk about for such a time as this, you are born where you are, when you are, for the purpose of people discovering God. And that is the book of Esther. They are where they are, for the purpose they are, so that the gospel can be advanced in this world. And at that point, it's the preservation of the people, Judah. Think about that. Even if the Jews come back from Assyria, this is the tribe of Judah from whom the scepter will never depart. They come back to Jerusalem and Messiah comes. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why it's such a big celebration. Even today, if you take away the Messianic stuff, which we don't want to do, obviously, but this is why the Jewish people celebrate this to this day, because they understand that their survival is dependent on these two people. And again, you mentioned this in the last episode, this idea that the Jewish people have always been in danger, have always seemed like there's always been plots against them, and yet God sustains, which is why Mordecai is so confident in chapter 4 that there's going to be a way out. Like, it's just a question of whether God's going to use you or not, whether you're going to be available. And so he puts himself into this position as we get into these later chapters, like, okay, so God's put us here. Now he's one of those people too. It's not just Esther. And so, okay, now both of us are going to do this. We're going to make this happen. We're going to use the wisdom that God's given us, and we're going to make sure that God's people survive this attempt on our lives. And then we take into of course, into our story, the Messianic story. What an incredible way to look at really all of the Old Testament, but certainly the story of Esther. Is that our Messiah comes because of Esther. She is not. It's interesting. Esther is one of these unique books. She's not mentioned anywhere else in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. She nowhere comes up, and yet without her, we don't have a New Testament. We don't have a lot of this stuff. And you talk about Nehemiah, but we don't get Matthew. That's problematic, right? So what an incredible way to celebrate, I think, what she's done and what he's done, Mordecai as well. Certainly one of the great heroes of the story. As they figure out how to maneuver through this edict that the king made. Just an incredible history. And I think that's just I'll quit talking here in a minute. But I think that's one of the incredible things about the Old Testament, that as if we aren't a people who are of the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, we miss out on so many of these ways that God has cared for his people and pushed history forward. And if we miss out on that, we miss out on the big picture ideas, which Esther is a small story, but it's a big picture story. If we miss out on those things, now we really fail to see the way that God can orchestrate history for the sake of the gospel, and the way God is still orchestrating history for the sake of the gospel. Hindsight helps us to kind of look at the world around us in a truer and more spiritual fashion.
I want people to understand, too, we're not talking out of both sides of our mouth when we say Mordecai says to Esther, look, you better get on board with this because God's going to do this one way or the other, this side of my mouth. And then I say, look, if she doesn't do what she does, who knows? We're not talking out of both sides of our mouth. It's just so people, I'm not saying this to you, I'm saying it to the listeners. We just want you guys to understand the magnitude of what Mordecai and Esther were a part of. And we want you to see that in your own life. Your life is not casual, guys. Your life is not casual. God wants you to play a part in the advancement of the gospel to this world. And I mean, here's this girl who's just being Esther, and she's beautiful, and she somehow is discovered and brought into the palace. And think back to the first episode and what Steve was saying. Now what do I do? The moral ambiguity. What do I do here? Mordecai, just this Jew that's kind of respected, that's what God says. You guys go there, you settle down, you do what you do. And from Mordecai to Daniel to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were playing prominent roles. You know what I mean? Who knows? Maybe Mordecai was one of those guys who was among those young kids that were brought into the service of Nebuchadnezzar that you just don't know about until, it's at least logical. It's, even if it's not probable, it's definitely possible that he was among that group, and you see, you play a role in eternity. And that's one of the parts of this book that I absolutely love. All of us play a role. So never minimize who God has made you to be. You might be an Esther. You might be a Mordecai. That's why that passage in Esther 4 is so important for such a time as this. And we are all extended a time, and we have to seize the time when the time comes, Yeah,
well, if you think about putting Esther aside just for a second, if you think about Mordecai, who was Mordecai before the story started? He was respectfully done something to earn himself close proximity to the king, and he had an adopted niece that he had tried to raise well. That's it. That's who he was. There's nothing that stands out about him. Esther, when you get to Esther, what does she have that we know of initially in the story? Is she's attractive. That's what we know. So what do you bring to the table? Maybe you're good looking. I don't know how God's going to use that, but I don't know how he can't. Certainly God does. Maybe you're just somebody who's involved in somebody else's life. And initially, it looks like that's all Mordecai is. He's just involved in somebody else's life, advising them as they proceed until he becomes a person of power in the kingdom. But that's not how the story starts. And for us, so often we kind of, well, those people can do that, or those people can accomplish those great things. The people who are put in positions of power, put into, they have these gifts or talents that I don't have. But what did Mordecai have when the story started? Nothing. Not that we know of, except that he was respectful and he honored his Jewish traditions and he adopted his niece. That's it. And so what we have going into this story, going into our lives, again, this is why looking at these stories is so important for us. How can God use me? I don't know, but it's not based on my abilities. It's based on where he's placed me and whether or not I'm willing to submit myself to his wisdom and his ways in the place where I am and around the people that he's placed me. That may be it. It's the way that I impact the people around me.
Yeah, I think when people just do what they do on a daily basis, God's going to use that. I mean, you mentioned Mordecai, you mentioned Esther, but kind of the bookend books for all of this, and I realize that Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, I get it, but it's Ezra, Esther, Nehemiah in terms of the timetable. But how is Ezra characterized? He's a guy that knew the scripture and taught it. That's it. How's Nehemiah characterized? I was cupbearer to the king. I think your point is well made. Just be a regular person. Just do what you do. You don't have to be spectacular. God's spectacular. And show me a place where, God doesn't take ordinary people and have them do extraordinary things. That's the story of the Bible. That's the story of the scripture. And it's one of the beautiful parts of this. Hey, let me bring out a point. You've mentioned Purim quite a few times through all of this. The word pure, guys, or P-U-R, pur, okay, it means lots, okay, like the casting of lots. So why is the festival called Purim? It's Esther 3:7. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the pur, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select the day and month, and the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. So it's almost like a mocking, a comeuppance statement, for the Hebrews, the Jews, to say, oh, you cast lots for our death. Well, we're going to call this celebration Purim or Purim, just because your attempt to kill us off failed, Yeah. All right, brother. 23 minutes into this, we finished the book. Give us a closing idea for this beautiful book of Esther.
Where God has placed you, be used by God. I mean, I don't think it's any more complicated than that. God has you somewhere and with certain people, and in that place and with those people, let God use you how he will in order to accomplish his work. The work of the kingdom.
I think that's powerful, considering how you concluded the first episode of this 2-part series. Number one, find God. Find God in this beautiful book, and then find how God's going to use you. And I love that. Find God and find how God's going to use you. And that pivot point really is that passage from Esther 4 for such a time as this.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, thank you for doing this. We're going to bring you back on here in weeks to come for additional books. This is the first one we've ever done online. As a matter of fact, Tanner just told me that we have to make sure that we got the first episode right. So we're going to have to go back and look at that. So you may be giving us 20 more minutes if you have 20 more minutes, but if not, we're done. So guys, thank you.
Everything I can.
Yeah, really. We'll try to repeat it if we have to. People are like, what are you talking about right now? So who knows? But anyways, all right. Well, listen, man, this has been great. I've enjoyed this. Like I said, we're going to do this again. And just thank you so much. Your wisdom is something that I've always deeply, deeply, deeply respected. Have a great time at the graduation this weekend, buddy.
Thank you.
That's a big deal. It really is. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. Well, Steve back again. Book of Esther this time. Who knows what's coming next? But Yeah, going to be amazing. We got the Book of Psalms coming up here around the corner. What do we got? Job next? I think Job's after Esther. And then the Book of Psalms. Pastor Bob's doing Job with us, and we've already recorded some of those episodes. Oh my gosh, they were absolutely amazing. So, anyways, don't want to get ahead. God bless you guys. Have a great day. Thanks to Pastor Steve. We'll see you guys tomorrow. God bless.